Charlie Chaplin didn't just marry a teenager. He married a 16-year-old girl. He'd made pregnant when she was 15, then spent 3 years treating her so badly that her 1927 divorce complaint became a 42-page public scandal that nearly destroyed his career and revealed the dark reality behind Hollywood's most famous comedian. Lita Grey met Chaplin in 1922 when she was 12 years old, cast as an angel in his film The Kid, and by 1924 when she was 15 and cast as the lead in The Gold Rush, Chaplin had initiated a sexual relationship that resulted in pregnancy, forcing a secret wedding in Mexico when Lita turned 16 to avoid statutory rape charges that would have sent Chaplin to prison. This video reveals what the 42-page divorce complaint contained that shocked 1920s America: allegations of sexual demands Lita called degrading, affairs Chaplin conducted openly while married, threats he made if she ever spoke about their relationship, how the pregnancy and marriage were concealed from the public for months, why Chaplin paid $825,000 in 1927 to settle the divorce rather than let details become public testimony, what happened to the 2 sons born during the marriage, who grew up calling their father cold and cruel, and how Lita Grey spent the rest of her life defined by 3 years as Chaplin's child bride, despite living 68 years after their divorce ended. The lawyer slid the document across his desk. Los Angeles, January 10, 42 pages, Mrs. Chaplin. Everything you've told me, every detail. Are you certain you want this to go public? Lita Grey Chaplin sat across from him. Age 19, 2 young sons at home. 3 years of marriage to the most famous man in the world. 3 years of hell. She picked up the complaint, read the opening. Plaintiff Lita Grey Chaplin alleges cruel and inhuman treatment by defendant Charles Spencer Chaplin, including but not limited to. The list that followed was devastating. Sexual demands she'd considered degrading, affairs conducted openly, threats made in rage, psychological abuse that left her contemplating suicide. All of it documented, all of it about to become public record. He'll pay anything to keep this quiet, the lawyer said. Once we file, once the press gets hold of this, his career is over. He'll settle. Large sum, you'll be provided for. Lita had been 16 when Chaplin married her. Pregnant, terrified, isolated from her family. Told to keep the marriage secret because it would damage Chaplin's image. Now she was 19, still a teenager, but done being silent, done protecting him. File it, she said, every word. Let the world see who Charlie Chaplin really is. The lawyer filed the complaint on January 10th. By January 11, every newspaper in America had copies. Chaplin wife seeks divorce, 42-page complaint details, years of abuse. The details were sensational. 1920s America had never seen anything like it. A divorce complaint that read like an indictment. Sexual details normally kept private, now public record. The press devoured it, published excerpts, analyzed allegations, interviewed anyone who'd comment. Chaplin's lawyers scrambled, tried to suppress it, argued it should be sealed, claimed the publicity would prejudice any trial. Too late. The complaint was public. The damage was done. And the question everyone asked, why had Charlie Chaplin, age 35, married a 16-year-old girl? Why had he kept the marriage secret? What had he been trying to hide? The complaint answered those questions in detail that destroyed Chaplin's carefully cultivated image as the lovable tramp who championed the downtrodden. Within weeks, Chaplin agreed to settle. $825,000, an enormous sum in 1927, equivalent to over $14 million today, plus trust funds for their 2 sons, plus property. The settlement came with conditions. Lita would not testify in court, would not give interviews elaborating on the complaint, would not write a memoir, would effectively disappear from public life. Chaplin paid the money, avoided trial, prevented Lita from ever telling her full story in her own words. But the 42-page complaint remained in court records. Public, permanent. A document that revealed the truth about Hollywood's most beloved star and the teenage girl whose life he'd destroyed before she was old enough to understand what was happening to her. 1922. Lita Grey was 12 years old. Her mother, Lillian, was a friend of Chaplin's, part of the Hollywood social circle. She brought Lita to Chaplin's studio, where he was filming The Kid. Chaplin needed a child for a brief scene. An angel. Lita was pretty. Dark curls. Expressive face. She got the part. The scene lasted seconds. Lita said maybe 10 words. But Chaplin noticed her. Told Lillian, "Your daughter is charming. I'll use her again." Over the next 2 years, Lita occasionally visited the studio with her mother. Chaplin was friendly, gave her small gifts, told her she was talented, predicted she'd be a star someday. Lillian encouraged it. Chaplin was the biggest name in Hollywood. His attention meant opportunities. She brought Lita around more often, let Chaplin mentor her. By 1924, Lita was 15, no longer a child, developing into a young woman, beautiful, innocent, starstruck by the famous man who paid attention to her. Chaplin was 35, 20 years older, at the peak of his career and wealth, accustomed to getting whatever he wanted, including teenage girls who were too young to understand the danger. In early 1924, Chaplin began production on The Gold Rush. He needed a female lead, the dance hall girl who falls for the lonely prospector. Chaplin had originally cast Georgia Hale, but during pre-production, he changed his mind, decided he wanted Lita instead. Lita was 15, too young for the role by any reasonable standard, but Chaplin was director, producer, star, and studio owner. His decisions were absolute. Lita Grey was thrilled. Her daughter in a Chaplin film. Leading role, opportunity of a lifetime. She signed the contract on Lita's behalf. Lita would play the dance hall girl. Shooting would begin immediately. What happened next remained disputed for decades. But the pattern was clear. Chaplin initiated a sexual relationship with his 15-year-old star, used his position, used her mother's ambition, used Lita's youth and naivety. By summer 1924, Lita was pregnant. She was still 15, unmarried, carrying the child of a 35-year-old man who could be charged with statutory rape. California law made sex with anyone under 18 a felony, regardless of consent. Chaplin panicked. Pregnancy meant scandal. Scandal meant criminal charges. Criminal charges meant prison. He pressured Lita to have an abortion. Illegal in California. Dangerous. But Chaplin had money, connections, doctors who'd perform the procedure quietly. Lita refused. Later she'd say she was terrified of dying during an illegal abortion. Her religious upbringing made her oppose it, and some part of her believed Chaplin would do the right thing, marry her, support the child. Chaplin realized abortion wasn't an option, which left marriage. But marriage to a 15-year-old pregnant with his child would create the scandal he was desperate to avoid. So he waited, kept Lita hidden, removed her from The Gold Rush, and replaced her with Georgia Hale, the actress he'd originally cast. Told the press Lita had scheduling conflicts, and made plans for a secret wedding the moment Lita turned 6. November 24, 1924, Lita Grey's 16th birthday. That morning, Chaplin drove Lita and her mother to a train station. They boarded a train to Empalme, Mexico, just across the border from Arizona. Why Mexico? Because California required 3-day waiting periods for marriage licenses, notification of parents if bride was under 18, public records that could be discovered by press. Mexico had none of these requirements. A quick ceremony, cash payment to a local official, marriage certificate issued immediately with minimal documentation. The ceremony took place that evening. No guests, no family besides Lillian, a Mexican official who barely spoke English. Chaplin, Lita. A hasty exchange of vows. Lita was 16 years old, 6 months pregnant, marrying a man 20 years older who'd made her pregnant when she was 15 and was now covering his tracks before statutory rape charges could be filed. The official pronounced them married. Chaplin paid. They immediately returned to California. For months, the marriage remained secret. Chaplin instructed Lita to tell no one, wear no ring, make no public appearances with him, continue living with her mother as if nothing had changed. The secrecy served multiple purposes. It avoided scandal about the age difference. It concealed the timeline of pregnancy and marriage that would reveal Chaplin had impregnated a 15-year-old. It allowed Chaplin to continue his bachelor public image. Lita complied. She was 6, pregnant, married to the most powerful man in Hollywood. She did what he told her. In January 1925, the marriage finally became public. Not by choice, but because the pregnancy could no longer be hidden. Studios released a statement. Charlie Chaplin married Lita Grey in November. The couple is expecting their first child. Press reaction was immediate. Chaplin marries teenage unknown. Questions about when they'd met, how old Lita was, why the marriage had been secret. Chaplin's publicity team worked overtime, emphasized that Lita was 16 legal age in Mexico, framed the marriage as romantic elopement, downplayed the 20-year age gap, never mentioned that Lita had been 15 when the pregnancy began. The scandal faded. America accepted the narrative. Chaplin and his young bride, unconventional but not criminal. Behind closed doors, the reality was much darker. May 5, 1925. Lita gave birth to Charles Spencer Chaplin Jr. She was 16 years old, a mother, married to a man who treated her like an inconvenience rather than a wife. Chaplin's treatment of Lita during their marriage followed a pattern of control and psychological abuse. Isolation. Chaplin kept Lita away from friends, limited her contact with family, told her the marriage must remain private to protect his career. She spent most days alone in the house with the baby while Chaplin worked. Affairs. Chaplin conducted multiple affairs during the marriage, made little effort to hide them. Lita found love letters from other women, confronted him. He told her it was none of her business. Sexual demands. The divorce complaint later detailed sexual acts. Chaplin demanded that Lita found degrading, acts she'd refused. His anger when she refused. Financial control. Despite Chaplin's enormous wealth, he kept Lita on a limited allowance, made her ask permission for expenses, reminded her that everything she had came from him. Verbal abuse. When angry, Chaplin told Lita she was stupid, unsophisticated, lucky to be married to him. Without him, she'd be nothing. In March 1926, Lita became pregnant again. She was Chaplin was not pleased, didn't want another child, blamed Lita for not preventing pregnancy, suggested abortion. Lita refused again. The pregnancy proceeded. Chaplin grew increasingly distant. March 30, 1926. Their second son, Sidney Earl Chaplin, was born. Lita was now 17 years old with 2 children under age 2, trapped in a marriage to a man who treated her with open contempt, isolated, controlled, financially dependent. She began having thoughts of suicide. Later in the divorce complaint, she described standing at windows considering jumping, taking bottles of pills from the medicine cabinet and wondering if taking them all would end the misery. Her mother noticed, urged her to leave, offered to help. But Lita had no money, no career, no way to support herself and 2 children, and Chaplin had made clear, if she left, she'd get nothing. He'd use his wealth and power to destroy her, take the children, leave her with nothing. So Lita stayed, until she couldn't anymore. Late 1926. Lita was 18. The marriage had become unbearable. Chaplin's affairs were constant. His verbal abuse had escalated. He'd begun threatening her if she ever spoke about their relationship, about his behavior. He'd ruin her, make sure she never worked again, take the children away. But the threats had the opposite effect. Lita realized she had nothing to lose. She was already miserable, already isolated, already without a career. Chaplin had taken everything except her ability to tell the truth. In December 1926, Lita consulted divorce attorneys, told them everything: the pregnancy at 15, the forced marriage, the abuse, the affairs, the sexual demands, the threats. The attorneys told her, everything you've described is grounds for divorce. Cruelty, extreme mental suffering. You can get a divorce, but Chaplin will fight. He'll try to silence you. Then I'll make it impossible to silence, Lita said. I want everything in the complaint, every detail, public record. The attorneys advised against it. That level of detail about your private life, it will follow you forever. You'll always be known for this scandal. I'm already known as Chaplin's child bride. At least this way, people will know the truth about who he really is. They spent weeks preparing the complaint. 42 pages, single-spaced, documenting 3 years of marriage with specificity that was shocking for 9. The complaint alleged, Section 1, cruel and inhuman treatment, Chaplin's verbal abuse, his rages, times he'd threatened violence, instances where he told Lita she was worthless, that she should kill herself, that he'd married her only to avoid criminal charges. Section 2, adultery, names of women Chaplin had affairs with during marriage, dates, locations, evidence including love letters Lita had found. Section 3, sexual misconduct, acts Chaplin had demanded that Lita described as abnormal, degrading, and painful. Her refusals, his anger, his threats when she wouldn't comply. Section 4, financial abuse, how Chaplin controlled all money, gave Lita minimal allowance, refused to provide adequately for their children, spent lavishly on himself and other women while keeping his family on tight budget. Section 5, threats and intimidation, statements Chaplin made threatening to take children, to destroy Lita's reputation, to use his wealth and connections to ensure she'd have nothing if she left. The complaint was filed January 10, 19. By afternoon, reporters had copies. By the next morning, excerpts were published in every major newspaper in America. Chaplin's wife accuses him of perversions. Lita Chaplin details years of abuse in 42-page divorce complaint. Child bride reveals dark side of famous comedian. The public reaction was explosive. This was 1920s America. Sexual details were never discussed in polite society. Private marital issues stayed private. Lita's complaint violated all those norms, made public what should have been private, used language that shocked readers, detailed acts many had never heard of. But the shock served Lita's purpose. Chaplin couldn't suppress it, couldn't intimidate her into silence. The truth was out, public, permanent. Chaplin's response was immediate. Settle. Quickly. At any cost. His lawyers contacted Lita's attorneys within days. Name your price. This ends now. Before trial, before testimony. The negotiations were brief. Chaplin offered $600,000. Lita's lawyers countered $1 million. They settled at $825,000, equivalent to over $14 million in 2024. Additional terms, trust funds for both children, property for Lita. Chaplin would pay all her legal fees, but the most important term, Lita would not testify in court, would not give interviews, would not elaborate on the complaint, would not write a book or sell her story. Chaplin paid for her silence after the complaint had already revealed everything. The settlement was finalized in August 1927. The divorce was granted. Lita walked away with financial security, but a ruined reputation. The public reaction to the divorce was mixed. Some sympathized with Lita, saw her as victim of an older man who'd taken advantage of her youth, but many blamed her, called her a gold digger, said she'd seduced Chaplin to trap him into marriage, that the complaint was revenge for not being allowed into Hollywood society, that she'd aired private matters publicly for money. The double standard was obvious. Chaplin had impregnated a 15-year-old, married her in secret, treated her cruelly for 3 years, conducted multiple affairs, but Lita was the villain for speaking about it. For Chaplin, the scandal damaged his career but didn't destroy it. His next film, City Lights, was critically acclaimed. He remained a star. The divorce became Hollywood gossip but not permanent stain. For Lita, age 19 when the settlement finalized, the scandal defined the rest of her life. After the divorce, Lita tried to build a career. She was 19, beautiful, had name recognition. Studios initially expressed interest, but Chaplin used his influence, made clear that anyone who hired Lita would have problems with him, his connections, his power in the industry. The offers dried up. Lita did occasional small parts in low-budget films through the 1930s. Nothing significant. Her career never materialized. She married twice more. Both marriages ended in divorce. Both men struggled with being Mr. Lita Grey. Defined by her past relationship with Chaplin, she spent decades moving between Los Angeles and Mexico. Tried business ventures that failed. Relied partly on the settlement money, partly on support from her sons as they became adults. The two sons born during the marriage, Charles Jr. and Sidney, grew up knowing Chaplin as distant father. Chaplin saw them occasionally, provided financially as required by settlement, but showed little emotional involvement. The boys later described him as cold, critical, uninterested in their lives. Charles Chaplin Jr. struggled with alcoholism, wrote a memoir in 1960 titled My Father, Charlie Chaplin, that described an emotionally unavailable parent who damaged both his sons through neglect. Charles Jr. died in 1968, at age 42, same age his father had been when he died. Alcohol-related illness. A life shadowed by being Charlie Chaplin's eldest son, Sidney Chaplin became an actor, more successful than his brother, performed on Broadway, had a film career, but he too described their father as someone who'd valued fame over family. Lita Grey Chaplin lived to age 87, died in 19. For 68 years after divorcing Chaplin, longer than most marriages last, she was defined by 3 years as Chaplin's child bride. Every article about her mentioned it. Every interview asked about it. When she died, her obituary headline, Lita Grey Chaplin, child bride of Charlie Chaplin, dies at 87. Not Lita Grey, actress. Not Lita Grey, mother. Always Lita Grey Chaplin. Always defined by the famous man she'd been married to for 3 years when she was a teenager. In the 1990s, near the end of her life, Lita gave a few interviews. Reflected on the marriage. The scandal, the aftermath. I was 15 when he got me pregnant, she said. 16 when we married. 19 when I divorced him. I'm 85 now. I've lived 66 years since then. But that's still what people ask about. Those 3 years. That's all anyone wants to know. Do you regret the divorce complaint? The 42 pages? No. It was the only power I had. He had fame, money, lawyers, studio connections. I had the truth, so I used it. Let people judge me for that. At least they know what really happened. The 42-page complaint remains in Los Angeles County court records. Public document. Anyone can request copies. For decades, the complaint was cited but rarely read in full. Too scandalous, too graphic, too detailed about matters polite society didn't discuss. But the complaint reveals something important. Lita wasn't lying. wasn't exaggerating. The details are specific, dated, corroborated by witnesses she named. On the pregnancy, the complaint documented that Lita was 15 when she became pregnant, that Chaplin knew, that he pressured her for abortion, that he waited until her 16th birthday to marry her specifically to avoid statutory rape charges. All true. Confirmed by dates, by witnesses, by the secret Mexico wedding. On the affairs, the complaint named women Chaplin had affairs with during the marriage, provided dates, locations, evidence. Several women later confirmed. Others refused to comment. None successfully sued for defamation, suggesting truth was defense. On the abuse, the complaint detailed verbal abuse, control, financial manipulation, threats. Charles Chaplin Jr.'s memoir decades later corroborated this, described his father's temper, his cruelty, his treatment of Lita, that the boys witnessed as children. On the sexual demands, the complaint's most controversial section described acts Lita found degrading, used language shocking for 1927. This section can't be verified. Private marital acts, no witnesses, but the specificity suggests truth. Lita had nothing to gain from inventing details that made her look naive or victimized. The complaint was Lita's testimony. She was never allowed to testify in court. The settlement prevented her from elaborating, but the 42 pages remain. Permanent record, her voice preserved, and they reveal a pattern. Powerful man pursues teenage girl, impregnates her while she's underage, marries her to avoid criminal charges, treats her cruelly during marriage, uses wealth and power to control her, then pays enormous settlement to silence her after she speaks out. This pattern is familiar now. In 1927, it was shocking. In 2024, it's recognized as predatory behavior, abuse of power, grooming and exploitation. Lita Grey was a victim. The complaint was her weapon, the only one she had. Los Angeles County Courthouse, Records Department, present day, filed under Chaplin Charles Spencer versus Chaplin. Lita Grey divorce 1927 sits the document that nearly destroyed Charlie Chaplin's career. 42 pages, yellowed paper, typed on a manual typewriter. Some words underlined for emphasis. Legal language mixed with shocking personal details. Plaintiff alleges that defendant Charles Spencer Chaplin did willfully and repeatedly engage in cruel and inhuman treatment. The document is public record, can be requested. Read, copied, January 10, 1927. Filed by 19-year-old Lita Grey Chaplin. 42 pages, single-spaced, every detail, every allegation. Impregnated at 15, married at 16, divorced at 19. 3 years of marriage to the world's most famous comedian. 3 years of abuse, control, and threats. Settlement, $825,000 to never speak again. But the complaint remained. Public, permanent. Lita lived 68 years after divorcing Chaplin. Always known as his child bride. Always defined by 3 years when she was a teenager. But the complaint gave her something Chaplin couldn't take away. The truth. In her words, in the record, Chaplin paid to silence her future. But he couldn't erase her past. 42 pages. Still there. Still readable. Still testimony from a girl who became a woman too young. Who was used by a powerful man. Who found the only weapon she had, the truth, and used it.